I want to start by saying, wow, from the consensus and the vision and everything that I've heard today around the fact that the future is already in the hands of kids, and that the kind of hacker ethic, the kinds of ideas that we're talking about here have already taken root. And there are people here, especially those kids in the next room, who are building that revolution that Ken Robinson was talking about. So, that was an amazing thing to hear. And I was going to say a lot of sort of similar things to people who've already talked today along those lines. Instead, what I think I want to do is make a couple proposals. I want to make some concrete proposals about how we get to that re-enchantment of education that Walter talked about this morning, and how we get to what I call the re-tinkerification of the web, which I think has been de-tinkerified recently. And also, I want to talk about how the kids down the hall and kids around the world are the people who need to and will do that work, and not us, although we might support them. So that's why I want to make some proposals around that. But first, to give you some context, I need to tell you a couple of love stories. And actually, it may be painful for you because they're love stories about me. But where's the clicker, by the way? Oh, the clicker would be awesome. Because you can't, the first love story is not about Lego. I know. I did have a young kind of flirtation with Lego. But really, the first love story is about punk rock. And so this is me when I was about 16. And if you could tilt down, you would see that I had combat boots and awesome kind of chains on my jeans and all these kind of things. I fancied myself a peace activist. That nice Ronald Reagan picture that Gabe had up there kind of was something that I would tear up and put pins on my wall of at the time. And I loved punk rock. I loved punk rock. And, why did I love it? What was that love affair about? Partly, it was a little bit about what Allison talked about this morning. It wasn't school. It wasn't my parents. We were in control. I was in control. It was a world that I controlled. So that's the kind of obvious rebellion kind of love affair with punk rock. But there was something else in it that was, I think, much more powerful and much more lovable. That it really was about making and doing things. It was about picking up a guitar and making music. It was about making a scene in your town. It was about making art. It was about making whatever you wanted to make. And for me, the thing was photocopy art. Did anybody here make photocopy art? It was a very, probably like, that's awesome, Walter. This is the kind of, all right, we'll talk about that later. And so photocopy art, if you can't get it from looking at this, was you rip up a bunch of magazines, you take some glue, you take some blank paper, you put some stuff together, and you make it into a cover of a fanzine, or you put it up on your wall, or you give it to your friends. Very, very simple technology. But it was fun, and I learned a lot. I learned, in fact, I think probably the things that got me on this stage and got me to be able to kind of do the job that I do at Mozilla. Because I learned the sorts of things that technology will save us kind of listed in their list. I learned that I learned about making an open-ended world. I learned about taking other things and ripping them up and tearing them apart and making something new. I learned that rough edges were actually fine and fun and a kind of beauty. And so, that's something I actually have a lot of. It was a love affair, and one that I remember fondly because it also shaped who I am today. And it's a good way to get to the next love affair. The love affair with the 2400 baud Boca modem. Now, there probably are more people in the room other than Walter who remember the sound of that modem, right? That beautiful whining, right? And like when it actually connected, when it finally negotiated the connection, it was such a beautiful sound. So that was a part of that love affair. And it wasn't, of course, just a love affair even primarily with the modem itself, although that sound still is music to my ears. It also was a love affair with the early internet and then eventually the web. And, like probably many people here, I was lucky enough to get a job in 1994, right after Mosaic had come out, working on the web, building web pages, setting up email for activist organizations, fun stuff. And I actually made the first progressive news website in Canada, and that kind of thing that probably looked like the Rocketry website we saw earlier with Ed. And what was interesting as I rolled up my sleeves and kind of got into that process of making that web page, and many more, is it wasn't that different. In fact, it was very, very much the same as making that photocopy art. And it was the same in that it was about kind of going around and looking at what other people had done, going and kind of clicking view source, just like Walter did on sugar, and seeing that right there I could understand how somebody who had done something cool had done it. I could tear it out, mash it up with a bunch of other pieces from other web pages, and I had something nifty myself. And that essence of the web, the fact that basically the DIY sense of the web was built in from the beginning, really to me was both a thrill and a part of that love affair, but I think is at the root of why the web has become so powerful and so interesting. And, I think that's important to point out here at TEDxKids because that sort of DIY ethic, which is there in punk rock, it's there in things like sugar, it's there in many things we heard today, and it's certainly there in the web, has actually become a big part of our society. The tinkerification of learning of society as a whole has happened to a significant degree. And I think that's something that we should celebrate and focus on in terms of building the kind of revolution that Ken Robinson talked about at the beginning of the day. But I also have a worry. And I have a worry that as that set of ideas about hacking and tinkering has become something quite pervasive and quite accessible to us, there also is a kind of a de-tinkerification, a shininess that is coming that is very much an aggressive counterforce to everything that we've talked about here today. And when Walter said, the title of his talk should have been, there's an app for everything or something about that, that also is a world that I'm concerned about. Not to pick on the iPod alone, because there's many, many other things to be concerned about. But the iPad represents a world that is finished, that's shiny, that specifically you can't go and view the source of, and more particularly, if you don't like how it works, you can't go and change it. And on top of that, it represents a world where we go back to a single authoritative distribution point, where if you want to put something up, you've got one person to ask whether you can put it up, and that's Steve Jobs. And if you look at what it's being used for education, it's very much the kind of education that we're not talking about here today. It's iTunes used videos, it's lectures, it's the 400-year-old tradition of how we teach. That's what's in that shiny box. And so I worry that a lot of what we've built actually starts to get eroded with that. And of course, it's not just the iPad. It is the fact that most open courseware is basically still on that 400-year-old model, and most electronic teaching happens that way. It's the fact that platforms like Facebook really do close down things in many ways the same way that the iPad does. But also, it's just the web itself has gotten complicated and opaque in a way that takes away a lot of that invitation to tinker. So that brings me to my first proposal, which is, I think we need to push back on that. Not just a little, a lot. And in particular, I think we want to encourage and help the kids who are in the other room to push back on that. And to do it in a way that maybe echoes a lot of what we've heard today, but also meets those kids where they are, or taps what they're already doing, which is on the web, in games, on social networks. So that's my first proposal, is that we creatively and aggressively encourage kids to hack and tinker, especially with the web, which I think many of us here are doing. And so Mozilla, who you may know for making Firefox, has started to step out into that world because we care about both where society and kids go and where the web goes. And so we've started this project called Hackasaurus, which we've been demoing in the next room. And at its simplest level, it's about getting kids to decorate the web like they decorate their room, where they rip down posters, put them up, put up pictures of their favorite bands, all of that kind of stuff, and letting them see that the web is something they own and shape. And I can talk a little bit about kind of the why of that in a second. The basic why is we want to encourage kids to feel like the web is their own. But I think the easiest way to do it, to kind of get your imagination side, is just to show it. So there's my son Tristan over there, who's 11. This is also him. He's a gamer. He also does a lot of YouTube stuff. He has 5 YouTube channels. And important for the next part of the narrative, one of the channels is called Hell Yeah Games. And he didn't know really anything about HTML. He put a lot of stuff on the web, but wasn't changing the web in any way up to about 4 weeks ago when we did a Hackasaurus workshop at the Maker Faire in Toronto. And he picked it up fast enough that I said, Tristan, can you actually help me demo this here? And he's actually also helped run these workshops here. So I'm going to get Tristan to basically show you what Hackasaurus is. And I'll kind of talk you through it. So here's Tristan. It's also him. You can only see the back of his head. And he's here. He's looking at Google. It's boring as Google always will be. And so he decides to tinker out the boringness. And so he's got something installed called a Firefox extension called the X-ray goggles, and he's just turned it on. Now he turns the X-ray goggles on, and what happens is he can see every element of the page. And so he's gone over the image, the Google image, and so he hits R for remix. So now he can see not the whole page, but it's like a mini view source just of that piece. And so he's going to actually paste something else in there and get rid of Google's boring logo. No offense to Google, they are friends of ours. Oh, it's the Hell Yeah Gaming logo. And so Tristan has now remixed the Google page. I mean, literally, he was able to do that, and the kids next door were able to do that quickly. In the first 5 minutes, getting a sense that the web is something that they can shape. And that's the first thing that we really want to teach the kids where they live, which is on the web. Second thing we want to do is to help them share that, because it's only interesting if they can show their friends how they changed Google. And so here you've got him just kind of posting a Flickr screen capture, which is built into the software right now. There are other ways you're going to be able to share in more sophisticated ways over time. And the third thing that Tristan's doing is he's hit a button called T for tear. And what that does is it actually gives him all of the HTML of the page he's changed, kind of similar to what Walter showed in Sugar, where he can then make a copy of that, throw it into an Etherpad that we've specially set up so that he can kind of play around with it, and it's persistent. He's actually now got his own website based on this. So what he's going to do is he's going to go to one of his gaming sites on YouTube. He's going to take the embed code. This is, I think, a Black Ops zombie commentary that he did. And he's going to throw it in there. And now, magically, all of a sudden, I bet you Google will have a Black Ops zombie commentary in a second. Yes, it is true. Hell yeah, Google now has a Black Ops zombie commentary. Thank you, Tristan. So, what we're trying to do with this is kind of a simple trick, right? We're trying to do a simple trick at the beginning of saying the web is not this opaque thing that you can't change, which increasingly, even though it's driven by user-generated content, it is. And it's not that hard in the first instance to make it as decoratable as your room, as the stickers on your laptop. The web is yours. And it's a message that made me fall in love with the web, and it's a message that is, I think, increasingly lost on all of us. And so, one of the things that we want to see more of happen is that we invite kids into that process of seeing the web is something that could change. And of course, it's a part of something broader, like what is happening here in terms of teaching a hacker ethic, getting kids, encouraging the fact that kids naturally have a curiosity and that we have built the raw materials of a world that they can tinker in. And so, we've heard many people today talk about that. Another project I would always call out, which I think is working in the same kind of ethic, is the Scratch project at MIT. So here are some kids at a Scratch workshop. Same idea that being able to program gives you actually the ability to live in this open-ended world, not the world that is polished and finished. And then another group I would call out is a group the MacArthur Foundation has helped start called UMedia that takes over libraries and kind of creates gaming and recording and multimedia spaces that really very concretely is an invitation to make in these kinds of ways. And all the projects we've heard today and these ones at Hackasaurus have something awesome in common, which is they are focused on this re-Tinkerification, both of learning, which really, if you go back to it, hasn't always been about this kind of top-down structured commodity thing that we have taken out of the industrial age, and the re-Tinkerification of the web. But I think all of these projects also miss something. They have a significant problem, including ours. And that problem is they're not thinking big enough. So when I think about Ken Robinson's revolution, when I think about what's actually happening there with those kids and what Gabe talked about is already happening and what Ed talked about as Generation D, it is something that has to be big and massive. And so that's kind of redundant. But, so the level we're thinking at it now is here is this Hackasaurus workshop that I showed you before is happening in New York. And, like a lot of other stuff we've heard about today, happens in dozens of places or will be happening in dozens of places, people going out and teaching and setting the scaffolding up for this kind of learning. But if I imagine the kind of revolution that we need, I think it looks a lot more like this. And what this is a Scout Jamboree from a Life magazine article in the 60s. And I think the magazine said it's about 100,000 kids. And if you think about scouting for a second, which is not a perfect corollary for what I'm talking about, but it actually has some interesting things that relate to my second proposal. Here's a 100-year-old, more than 100-year-old organization that is really about skills and fun, that is in countries around the world, that is currently 41 million kids between girls and boys, and really has connected some kind of idea of stewardship and civic values to that fun and learning. And so imagine for a moment a movement of 40 million kids connected with some common identity around making and hacking. Imagine those kids focused on stewarding, shaping, playing with the web, playing with robots, playing with electronics, playing with and remixing school, and playing with and hacking how the world works. That's the kind of movement that I propose we need. And I think by going out and meeting kids where they are, on their games, on their social networks, we can encourage them and help them to build that. And that's what I think we have started here and need to do as we move forward from today. So thanks very much.